right. Warwick, Arlene, it is 1 o'clock, so I think let's kick it off.
Great. I'm going to do the quick. I'm going to do the sort of quick intro, and then we can sort of chat about how this thing will run. Aha. Pulling this pres up. Okay, so welcome to everybody. How the next hour is going to work. We're going to try to keep it to 45 minutes of content with some Q&A. I'd actually really like it if we could be more interactive than that. So if everybody would like to pop questions into the chat, Arlene and I are going to be sort of co-presenting. So there'll be an opportunity for either of us to answer questions, keep an eye on the chats, etc. I think Henry, being recorded, it is. The recordings and slides will be made available. And the two perspectives here you're going to get is a governance lens and an insurance lens, which I think is incredibly helpful, given that I think that the lenses work because we all have to engage with AI. It's not something we can ignore. So this is a little bit about me. I've been working in one way or the other in corporate governance for my whole life. So I am an attorney by profession, and I look at the application of law into businesses as an enabler and as something that helps businesses to grow and to declutter and to become less bureaucratic and not more. And I think I'm just going to hand over to Arlene quickly to give an intro of herself.
Thanks so much, Warwick. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Arlene Steyl, the founder and MD of Dire Wolf. My background is actually, I come from investment banking background, where I studied mathematics and informatics. I then founded We Think Code, so I guess that's where my love of technology comes from. So that's a bit of my slant as well on the technology side. And most recently, we started Dire Wolf, and we are basically a bespoke insurance advisory firm where we really work together with our customers to understand their risks and help them mitigate risk. So not just look at insurance, but really on the risk mitigation side. And our speciality lies in cyber, directors and officers, and liability cover, which are some of the exciting topics for today. Thanks, Warwick.
Awesome. Thanks, Arlene. So I'm not going to belabor what Sirdar is. Sirdar is a lead guide on a mountain climbing expedition. And it was pointed out to me yesterday by the ex-founder Carl Bates, who's ticking along to try to become the Prime Minister of New Zealand. That you've got to focus or specify that good boards make businesses grow and grow better and bigger. But I think that for me, and as a suppose and dyed in the wool entrepreneur, sometimes you don't really you associate boards with over-regulation. But everybody who goes to the company's house in whichever country we're talking to becomes a director on day one, and you don't really need any pretext other than just founding the company. And once you are a director, you effectively are a board of one. So this is relevant to you, whether you've got a corporate board or not, and that sort of brings us nicely into why this conversation now is that. As I mentioned before, AI is in your business, whether you like it or not. Your people are using it. Your clients expect you to use it. And a lot of the decisions that you're making are shaped by it, even though you don't really like the idea of being dragged along by something that isn't necessarily working inside of your organization. So the big and I say this is framing. So this is why we're having this conversation is what happens when you're uploading client sensitive information or even sensitive information for your own business into a public platform that you're not really sure of the provenance of. So the overriding sense here is you can delegate that task, like read through this 300-page document, but you can't delegate the accountability. And so there is a duty of care as a director that you have to apply your mind, particularly when it comes to the aspects of running your business. The latest King Code has made that quite explicit in terms of what is required of you. But then, again, the stakes are even higher than that. And I think maybe in terms of personal liability, it's a good opportunity to step off and then to let Arlene just talk about, likely consequences if you're found to have not carried out the duty of care that you should have from an IT perspective.
Yeah, Warwick, I can share a little bit of experience because we have a lot of clients in the tech space, and what we typically look at from an insurance point of view is 3 policies together, because we're talking now specifically what do directors need to look at. But your duty as a director is really to understand and assess the risks of your business. So as a typical SME, you would look at there's a cyber risk. We're all aware of the cyber risk. It is your duty to assess within your own business how that risk looks like. But is it something that you are discussing at a board level? Then there's the professional indemnity risk, and we can go into detail. And as you've exactly said, AI by no means outsources this risk. It's absolutely still your risk. And then there's the directors and officers liability risk. And what we see that those 3, from an insurance policy point of view, those 3 interact quite nicely. But what will happen is if you do not have cyber insurance in place and you do have a cyber attack, then your stakeholders could say, well, it was the director's responsibility to be aware of this risk and to put the mitigating factors in place. And one of them is insurance. Some of the other is various ones that we can go through in detail, but multi-factor authentication. How did you look at your AI policies? There's a whole lot of checklists, but one of them is insurance. And then if you don't have the insurance in place to protect you, then what we often see is then the stakeholders come after the directors. And then if you do not have directors and officers liability in place, that is where you are really vulnerable, because you can be held liable in your personal capacity. So just sort of at a high level, those are the sort of 3 insurance lens aspects, how you can protect yourself. But absolutely, if we just go to the duty of a director, if we just go back to first principles, AI is very relevant at the moment, but in our view, AI should be seen no different to any other tool in your business. So no matter what tool you use in your business, or even an outsourced service provider. So if you use, let's say, a legal firm for advice, if they give you the incorrect advice, it is still your duty and care to have done your due diligence on that legal firm. Is it someone that you trust that you can use? And then, yes, it's actually your duty and care to understand how does my contract look? Can I hold this external party liable? For example, do they have professional indemnity insurance that protects you, that you can go after them? So think of AI in the same lens as that. It is just another tool that you use. You need to make sure as a director that you have all the protections in place. And did you put proper care into selecting the AI tool that you use? Do you have a proper policy in place that governs the way that AI is used? So I've given a lot of background now, but I think it's very important to know that the risk is still on the company. And as a director, you need to be aware of that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Arlene. I think that's well articulated, and I think that the slide that have just popped up is, what is and what isn't insurable. And yes. So, the previous slide you're saying, so where does liability actually sit? It's always going to sit with, so the entity itself doesn't have, a hand, mouth, and legs, and so the directors are effectively that entity, that juristic legal entities. They're its personality, and so that's where the liability eventually always sits. And so when you look at the insurability of that, you can't go, well, I got the wrong answer, but I did the research because I put it into an AI. And similarly, you can't say, well, how could we possibly be wanting to protect against a data breach when hackers are now using these monstrous AI tools? I mean, what are we supposed to do? And I think, not to state too much of the obvious, but having insurance is possibly not a bad start.
But I think, the important thing is things might go wrong. And I think we should also not, as a director, you cannot ensure that there's no risk. There is absolutely risk. Your duty is just to to in the best possible ways to the tools, with the tools to your disposal, make sure that you take the reasonable steps to protect your company against the risk. So the example of cyber insurance, again, we can look, the average cost of a data breach could be 40 million rand. As a smaller startup, you might not need that high limit, and you might take out a lower limit because there's affordability calculations. But the test is just, did you assess the risk? Did you put the correct measures in place to protect the business? And the same way, if we just look at professional indemnity, the reason that professional indemnity insurance is there is we know that no one is perfect. So the same way that an AI model can make a mistake, any professional can still make a mistake. Even the best, it doesn't say that you're not good. Everyone makes a mistake, but that is one of the elements that is there to govern against, if a mistake happens, what are the mitigation protections that you have put into place? And I'm just talking insurance now, but again, insurance is just one of the measures that you can put in place.
Absolutely. I think that the other thing is that often when there's new opportunity, you can fall into a trap of saying, okay, well, how do you manage the downside? I think that the upside here is if well managed, putting various AI interventions into your business are sort of absolutely fundamentally changing toward your marketing and your reach and the speed at which you turn around requests, etc. Putting your customer relationship management software, etc., onto sort of hyperdrive. So there are a lot of rewards for that, as long as you're also remembering the downside there is, well, not the downside, but the consideration is, what are you doing in terms of POP here? What are you doing in terms of looking after client confidential information, and what is in place in terms of breaches, etc. And then in terms of, and I suppose that this was the earlier point around the opportunity is that you ask the right questions. And I think part of the question then is, where is this data going to be stored? Are we capable of having and I was on a webinar earlier this morning around one of the companies realized that because they're in the insurance industry, they needed to have a private LLMs, and you can actually hive off that large language model to just look through your own data that you own, that you protect, that you firewall. So there are innovative ways to using AI, but using it in a far smaller, more defined way, as opposed to the sort of, and I think that, like everything that we often find in life, is that there's a premium to be paid the more you secure. The cheaper it is, more than likely, the less protected it is. So that's kind of just a bit of a scale to think about when you're giving. I don't know if everybody's seen some of the funny outcomes of giving employees unfettered access to tokens, and some of the bills that have come back through Anthropic, etc. So I think well-governed data policy is something that, as a board or even as an entrepreneur, you can really think through. Is it get a good data policy in place that everybody inside of your organization really understands? And that comes down to, I think, that responsibility, the responsibility around your kind of your board and what you should do, an AI register, setting up an AI policy, assign accountabilities throughout your business so that everybody understands when it gets to a certain threshold or a certain usage limit, or you're uploading a certain quantity of data, who do you speak to? Who do you double check that with? Is there an automated verification that stops you and says, hold on, are we sure this is where we want to be? And then in terms of cover, Arlene, like that, review that policy. I know everybody often sort of thinks that's such a pain every year to review their policy and review their cover, but do that purposefully. It's not a question of saying, well, let's take what we had last year and add a few percent. These things are changing at such a dynamic rate. actually re-looking at the products that are available in the market, and also the quotations that are out there and what they specifically cover is really, really important. So I think every year it's an absolute must that you're speaking to somebody who is an insurance professional who really does understand this cover, and then going through it. And whatever you do, please don't take your last year's policy and put it in AI and say, what are the gaps?
Warwick, we get that often now. Our clients send to us clearly AI vetted questions on the policies. But I guess that is why the way that the insurance industry work is that you have to have an advisor to explain this to you. And that is actually really to protect the consumer, because I think it is unrealistic to expect that every customer or director must understand the ins and outs and the details of the policy. That is why you have financial advisor. So please just ask the questions. Your financial advisor should be able to answer that and give you the proper advice that you require.
Yeah, great. And I think that just in terms of, everybody loves a list. I certainly love a list. It's kind of it's much easier to give your brain a little bit of a break from all of the worrying about the world, to go, okay, just do the next thing in front of you. So I think just in terms of that list, so first of all, and this is an interesting one, because it happened to me the other day. I was filling out a form, and I was asked, and it was a supplier onboarding form, and they said, do you use AI in your business? And so I said, well, we use these three things. But when I put it out to the rest of my business, they were like, yeah, but we also use it for this and this and this, and we also generate really cool images. And I'm like, well, okay, great. But I think that it just goes to show that even inside of a governance business, there are things there where as soon as your employees have got access to almost free AI, you have no idea what they're also doing. So I think that's why those policies are quite important. And then
We lost sound. There's no sound.
Yeah, no sound.
Warwick, it sounds like we are struggling to hear you.
I'm gonna unmute myself.
You are back.
Right, there we go. Nothing like muting yourself mid sentence.
Warwick, just to let you know
Passionate
that
list.
the right-hand part of your screen is cut off. We can't see the right-hand side of the slides.
There
That's
we
better.
go. Better.
Is that better?
It's back, yes.
Sorry.
On my side.
Okay, good. So thank you for that. While we sort of paused, and I'm trying not to be a Luddite, do we have any questions from anyone?
I've not seen any coming through, but please, guys, submit any Q&A that you might have.
Or just sort of unmute and sort of introduce yourself and maybe where you're from, and then ask any kind of question. I'm going to carry on through my now hopefully fully transparent list. So just in terms of who runs your AI risk in your organization. So one of the things about this sort of new AI acts and contemplations of oversight in particularly financial services is that you have to have an information officer. And I think it's a useful idea that information officer is fully vetted and fully informed on what your organization is doing in terms of AI. There should always be a standing item on your board agenda. If it isn't, who's using it, or how you optimize, for example, search through using GMO and not SEO, for an example. It should be something that you're talking about all the time. Is there so once you've adopted, if you've acquired or had programmed an AI tool, what's the policy on its use? So you inadvertently tick a box that says run trial for Copilot as an example, and so you do, and so now you've got a Copilot trial inside of your enterprise system. So you use Microsoft, but what's the policy on using it? So all of a sudden your employees are answering very generically because what they're doing is just hitting right response. and that's that's cool because it means they're responding really, really fast within your SOPs. But who's actually then responding, and just understanding that and having a clear policy is very useful, and then aligned to that policy is have you told staff what they can and can't upload? And if you're in an advisory a service or in an advisory capacity, are you advising your clients whether or not they should be, for example, uploading financial information, financial statements into large language models that are potentially free? So that's in essence, it's publishing them. So and ignorance of the law isn't an excuse. That's a wonderful old Latin concept, or Latin, a Roman, and we practice Roman Dutch law, but one of the sort of original Roman concepts is if you didn't know, it isn't good enough. And then in terms of directors and officers, public liability, cyber cover, I think Arlene's gone through some of what you should or shouldn't look for. And then the final point in this checklist is often when we do board evaluations and we go out to financial regulators, like, would you be able to explain your AI oversight to that regulator if you were found to be in breach tomorrow? So could you, in a succinct way say, well, these are the checks and balances, these are the opportunities, or these are the risks that we had identified, and this is what we did about them.
And maybe just a tip, most of our businesses have a POPI manual, a PIA manual, a privacy policy on your website. Make sure that whatever you have in that policy corresponds to what you actually do in your business, because most of our businesses have transformed quite significantly in the last 2 years. And even though we always say we need to update those policies on an annual basis or when things change. So I would recommend just having a relook at those policies and ensuring that you disclose the use of AI models if you do use them. We have a question from Tim. Have we had any claims for security breaches of code written by AI? So when we get a breach, it's difficult to know because we are on the client side. So the attacker quite possibly definitely uses AI. So we don't really know whether the code was written by AI or not. But a lot of the attacks we've recently seen is actually cyber attackers hacking into one person's email and then fraudulently contacting everyone, all the customers of that organization. So not the typical attack that you might think someone hacks into your system, you can't access it and they demand a Bitcoin. That's sort of what people think about. What we're seeing a lot is these sort of small breaches where they breach one person in the organization's email, and then they definitely use AI to mimic your writing, to go through your emails and look at which customers and there's normally a financial transaction. So we definitely see that, and it is quite clear that that is driven by AI enhanced tools. And then I hope that answers the question, Tim. Then
yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that certainly in the past has always been somewhat comforting is that if you were to, for example, get access to my mailbox, good luck to you. You'd first have to understand my filing system, and then you'd have to understand, a whole bunch of other stuff to be able to derive any kind of value from it. But now with the ability to upload that into an LLM and to search it and to clone it, I think that it's quite scary how quickly you could write exactly the same as the person that you've hacked, and also do very, very focused searches on things that you're looking for: financial information, confidential information, company numbers, ID numbers, etc. So I think that even if you look at longhand hacking that isn't particularly technologically savvy, it's quite a scary concept to think that even just cracking into somebody's emails or their SharePoint would give you access to a whole load confidential and private information.
Yeah. I see one more question before we move on. Helen is asking, what are the risks associated with AI note-taking tools? So again, it just comes back to you are the person responsible. We work with a lot of doctors in medical malpractice, and this is quite a good example here. So there are a lot of note-taking tools in the medical space, but still how the world operates today, even those that are very dedicated, this is the only thing that the tool does. Every single time, a human still needs to sign off on that notes. So the risk is, quite frankly, that the AI tool might get it wrong. But as Warwick has said in the beginning of the presentation, you cannot blame the AI tool. It is still your responsibility to review and sign off on those notes. I hope that answers the question. And then Tim said you were thinking of apps written by AI that's easily hackable. We haven't seen any attacks like that yet, but that is absolutely a big risk. And I think that is my worry as well, is that everyone now thinks that they can do everything with AI and that they lose the testing and the meticulous scrutiny of things like security. So that is absolutely a very big risk, Tim, but we haven't personally seen an attack on that yet.
Yeah, and I think Arlene, like, you know, it's an interesting thing. We've got a number of different like ways that AI has integrated. So one of them is that we don't like big reams of data. So we're taking Excel sheets that we used to have that had a whole load of client contacts, emails, telephone numbers, and we're saying, oh, but all AI is going to do for me is quickly clean it up. You know, just put it into CSV that I can put into my new CRM system. That's like fantastic. But what you've just done is you just effectively breached by holding all of that client confidential information and then uploading it. So it's just around the understanding that that's actually what you're doing. And again, I think, you know, not to want to be overly bureaucratic, but people don't know what they don't know, and your employees aren't going to know that unless that's somewhere, it's written down somewhere, it's spoken about. Board members won't know that unless it's actually on the agenda, and everybody is making sure that that kind of thing is an easy to understand language and is circulated to everyone. I think we've got another question from Mfana. I'd assume that the risk is also that AI or someone who infiltrates it might use sensitive information in minute taking. As in, yes, exactly. So absolutely. If you've decided you want to, why do you want to increase your sales price, etc., that's inside of your company minutes. So you've chatted about it. It's in your sales minutes. You know, and if your sales minutes are sitting on a server that doesn't belong to you, and you're subject to a data breach outside of your organization, those minutes are now public information. Or not public information, but there's certain information to the person that would like to make use of them.
And to answer that,
yeah.
from an insurance lens, so if you'd like to protect your business, so if there is a breach into your system, so that could even be from an internal employee, but someone who breaches the system, so gains unlawful access to your system, any such attack would be covered by a cyber policy. So that is quite different to you incorrectly or out of policy uploading confidential information onto a public LLM. That is not a cyber breach. That is an employee internal accidentally or maybe unknowingly uploading confidential information. But if you treat everything confidential and you have put in all the measures to protect it and that system is breached, that is when a cyber policy will protect you against any financial losses. Or we can go through detail if anyone has questions on that, but the cyber will protect you there. If you make a professional mistake, so if you give the wrong advice in your professional capacity, that is where your professional indemnity insurance will protect you. So let's say then you are being sued by a customer for the incorrect advice, that is when your professional indemnity insurance will apply to that. And then if a director is seen to have made an incorrect mistake that is not to the benefit of the company, that is when your directors and officers liability will protect you. But when it comes to just AI models, there is actually a new product on the market that specifically, if you use an AI model for, let's say, a specific reason. So there's a specific AI model that needs to have 99% accuracy for, let's say, fraud detection in a bank, then you can actually protect against that. So there's a whole lot of different things. But as a director, I think it's quite important to understand what type of risk can be potentially mitigated by what type of insurance. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is to understand what the tools that you're actually using, as Warwick have said, what is actually being used in your business. And just as a business owner myself, the easiest thing is to have is to give your team access to AI, but have it in a business-wide manner, in a very controlled, someone is managing the access, then at least you also know who has access to what. And typically these tools plug into Xero, it plugs into Monday.com, whatever tools you use. But if you set it up at a company-wide level, you can see who has access. So it is managed and contained. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. I mean, I think that and I think that's, you know, I've kind of switched back to those slides because I think it's a good thing to separate out and to just really understand exactly what is insurable. So just in terms of the behavior against what you can get a policy for. So we've all sort of seen in Australia, one of the audit firms gave their trainees or their audit partners access to AI, and a lot of the audit report was written by AI. Now, in that situation, you know, I certainly felt quite a level of empathy for the organization, given that a lot of the longhand work was inevitably done as per contract. I think that when it comes to wanting to, you know, summarize things, be a little bit crisper, be a little bit sharper, make sure you haven't left anything out, I think that that's where a lot of the professionals think, well, let me just quickly run it through an LLM just to make sure that, you know, I haven't spelled anything wrong, or I haven't come to the wrong conclusions, or, you know, I've been working on this and I can't see the wood from the trees. And I think that there is a level of you know, your LLM, let's say, you know, Claude, being like a colleague, being like a good colleague that can kind of sit and check your homework. I think that the one of the first things that we said in the sort of presentation, with the introduction to this presentation, is, you know, at what point are you using it as a tool, and at what point are you delegating decision making, and be completely clear that you understand what that line is, because as soon as you're delegating away any kind of decision making or any process where you otherwise would bear professional onus for making that decision, then you have to do it yourself, and you have to do it specifically yourself, or through a policy, and through a policy that you make completely clear throughout your business. Are there any other sort of anecdotal questions around where that, you know, I think that from an insurance point of view, Arlene, I always understand that, you know, you always look at, and I spent a lot of time doing import export, and the easiest way for me to understand insurance is always at what point on the ship the cargo was. So is the cargo, you know, if it falls into the ocean because it falls off the crane, who's carrying the insurance? Yes. You know, is it the buyer or the seller? And I think very much the same way with AI is that you've got to really articulate the point at which that decision is made, and say, was the decision actively made by a human? And even if that decision is that the tool was or wasn't available to somebody, that is a decision in of itself.
Mm. And I think we probably all thinking a lot now along the lines of a Claude or a ChatGPT that's more like a general AI tool, but more and more we will have targeted specific companies that all they do is build AI-enabled models for other companies to use. So in that case, I would still today think of it similarly to any other, so whether it is Zero or any other tool that you use, if that tool makes a mistake, then look at your contract. What does the SLA say that you have in place? And what we actually advise a lot of our clients is whoever you have a contract in place with for services, or if you think of your suppliers, ask them what insurance they have in place. So for example, for professional indemnity. So if you use a tool that makes a mistake, or if you use a law firm, we all just assume that they have it, and lawyers have to have, and financial advisors have to have PI insurance in place. It's a legal, or it's a regulatory requirement, but ask those questions. Ask your suppliers. So if something goes wrong, what rights do I have? What recourse do I have? And I would ask them, what level of professional indemnity insurance do you have in place? Because then you know if you need to put in a claim against a provider or a supplier, then at least they have that insurance in place. So, but AI would be no different, and it will be more and more and more. And I see a couple of questions here on specific. I don't think I'm well placed, and I'm not a lawyer to comment on each of the individual ones, but I would say either ask a professional to please advise on which of these are secure. They will have their own privacy policies. They'll have their own POPI guidelines. Ask for those, review those, have a look in your SLA. What do they say about data storage? Is it stored in country, out of country? There's a couple, and maybe we can work on a list, Warwick, of questions to ask. But I do think it's important to ask those questions.
Yeah. So Tanya's asking specifically around Copilot, and if you buy or if you subscribe to sort of Microsoft, Microsoft has got servers in Germany and Ireland, and they will tell you that they're completely secured, and that your SharePoint is encrypted, and therefore actually when you're using Copilot, what you're using is an aggregator. And the aggregator is kind of a trained AI. So what you're getting is that you're getting a non-public version of ChatGPT essentially inside of Microsoft. And so you would consider, and I think Arlene's absolutely right in terms of how you've set it up, because you have to really specify that. And the company that provides it, if you do it yourself and you sign up to a Microsoft, using an agent, or you have a reseller, that is a very important point to raise. So as an example, Sirdar doesn't have any kind of outside public link. So we use Copilot internally, but it's to assist with all of the people inside of our business to be able to use best practice, etc. So we've got an AI policy. But we're sort of users of Copilot because we've satisfied ourselves that it doesn't expose us to any liability. We've got another question here. Oh yes, just in terms of the list of questions, absolutely. And I think that that sort of doubles to what I was saying earlier. Is that nobody is inherently lazy. I think what happens is that we are overwhelmed by tasks, and one of the brilliant things about AI as a concept is that it's starting to automate tasks, and it's intuitive. And so much of what happens when we're not getting to something is now being done, as long as when we're sitting thinking about how we brief the thing that's doing those tasks, we do it in a way that is in keeping with our professional and public, or our professional responsibility, and also not in breach of any kind of public liability. So it's not a kind of a doom and gloom thing. I think that where it's quite important, and I think that's why the collaboration between Dire Wolf and Sirdar is that understand from a from a board or from an entrepreneur's point of view, you can't ignore AI because it's already in your business, whether you like it or not. But what you can do is you can apply your mind to thinking about how do you mitigate risk. How do you gain the most benefit from using the systems without breaching any kind of personal information issues or any attracting any liability? And then so it's both the upside and the downside. And I think that I quite like the I'm going to pop that slide back up. But you can delegate a task, but you can't delegate accountability. So you always have to take that accountability. And so this I see this version is still King 4, but there's now a King 5, which is even more explicit around what is the board's responsibilities in terms of the conversation and the policies. And if nobody sitting on a board has an AI subcommittee, then they definitely need one, because I think that maybe Arlene can comment, but you can't learn everything, even if you're really keen on understanding all of the different aspects to AI. There's absolutely no way. That's a career in of itself. There's no way you're going to understand all of it. So being able to ask the right questions is probably more important than knowing the answers to all of those questions, and even thinking that you know the answers to those questions.
And it is definitely an evolving space. So I think there's always a reasonable test. So whether it comes to a court matter or an insurance matter, there's a reasonable test. So but again, Warwick, if you can show that you have it on your board agenda, that you take it seriously, that will go a long way to show that you, and we have a client, for example, they said to us, we've identified that the AI tool we use don't have audit logs, but they've said it's coming out in the next, so I said to them, well, put that in your policy, put that as a risk that you've identified. We're not saying that you should take no risk in business, but we're just saying, make sure that you articulate the risk, that you understand the risk, and that you mitigate it as best possible with the knowledge that you have today. Bearing in mind that, and in cyber insurance, it's the same thing. Every week there's something new. So you can't expect a director to be aware of absolutely all the risks and what's happening, but at least make sure that you put the right, and that's why I quite like, at least if you have insurance on an annual basis, it is reviewed. But as you said, please don't just sign the box and just say, tick me over for next year. Please ask your advisor to go through it with you, to explain the changes in risk. And something that we've seen often is, often a lot of commercial policies or your typical D&O policy have a very small, they say that there's cyber insurance included, but please have a look at what is actually included there, because there's often very light cover there that is not often what we see when we review it properly, that is not adequate. So please make sure that you just review. Don't just think you have cyber insurance in place because it was an add-on on another policy. Please make sure that you know what is actually included and covered.
Yeah, I think that, and I say that for AI, but I also say that for directors and officers insurance. It's one of these things where often you go through your whole your insurance schedule, and if you're working in a manufacturing concern, as an example, you're insuring all sorts of things, and that has a premium attached to it, and you just take for granted you're paying this big premium, it must be included somewhere. And I think it's really, really important that you specify what is and what isn't included. And then insurers also, they're constantly innovating, they're constantly changing. So you'll find that the insurer itself will go along and really apply their minds to, hold on, from a policy wording point of view, what is and what isn't coverable, what's insurable, what's the global best practice. So it really is it's an opportunity rather than a sort of something of a waste of time every year to really engage your mind on the insurance process and on the renewal process. I always laugh at MTN or Vodacom will phone you and say to you, oh, you have an upgrade due. And you're going, but hold on, what do you mean? You want me to enter into a new contract with you and you're calling it an upgrade? And I always sort of admonish the poor person who had to phone me. But it's very similar with insurance. It's not a question of a renewal. You've got to really look at it every year as going into cover yourself for the next 12 months. And I think if you approach it with that mentality, you're going to get far better advice and you're going to get a far better product.
And if I may add one story, I think we tend to think that the insurers just every year want to not pay us out, so make the cover more stringent. But as an example, the insurers also see what the clients need. So one of the big cyber insurers that we often work with, they've actually updated their policy wording. Just a small example. So you used to have to name all the outsourced service providers that you use to be covered in a cyber breach. And actually, we've seen 2 attacks recently where the attack actually came through the outsourced service providers. So they've realized this is a risk to everyone, and almost everyone uses some sort of outsourced service provider, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, Google. So the new policy wording actually automatically includes all outsourced service providers that you have a contract in place with. That is now the word. So it's not always worse for you. Sometimes they actually include benefits. But again, you need to make sure that you are on the new policy wording if those changes come, and that you are with the insurer that actually includes that. So that is still your responsibility to see that. But sometimes there's some really good updates that they make as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think that Trevor, you popped in there, when would the use of AI that's resulted in financial loss of a client be a valid factor for repudiation by an insurer? I think that does kind of what Arlene said, just kind of covers some of it. And just in terms of the use, like what would a reasonable person have done? So in terms of the causality between the use of AI and the financial loss, you need to be able to look at that and say the causal link between using that LLM and the advice that you gave and the financial loss. What is the causal link then? And at any point did you abdicate responsibility and just copy paste their question and send it off to them? In which case it's going to be difficult from an insurance point of view to say to the insurer, no, but I mean I did my absolute best to apply my mind and sort of my financial best practice in giving them that advice.
But
so I think,
Warwick, if your insurance policy doesn't specifically exclude the use of AI, then this is maybe not a smart thing to do, but from a professional indemnity point of view. So if you get sued by the client, you will lose in court because you didn't practice due care. But that is actually what your insurance is there to protect you from. So the insurer won't repudiate your claim unless the policy specifically excludes the use of AI, or you specifically in your application form said, I don't ever use AI. So that's the benefit of insurance. So the insurance doesn't test, it tests the policy wording and what you said. So the insurance is actually there to protect you against an unforeseen loss. So if someone did something that they shouldn't have like this, that is actually when insurance can protect you, but you will lose the battle in court, if that makes sense, because you didn't practice due care. And maybe the other question from Alan here is, how do insurance policies work with regards to data that's stored locally, but it's processed abroad? So again, if there's a breach, it's a cyber event. So typically, cyber covers you for the entire world. Sometimes the US is excluded, so maybe just check your policy wording there. But the cyber breach is about the cyber breach. It doesn't matter where it occurred, if that makes sense. So, but cyber is different to poppy. So you shouldn't confuse the two. But if there's a cyber breach, typically, please check your policy wordings, but typically, no matter where it happened in the world, so typically your insurance is, so if you insure a building, it's typically ring-fenced to South Africa, but with cyber, it's not, because cyber, you cannot do that. So cyber typically covers you for anywhere in the world.
Okay, so if we're talking about so you get this sort of very routine email that says your personal data could have been compromised in a hack in a Canadian server, and you kind of get that in your email in your inbox, and then you kind of go, okay, hold on, my personal data that would have included my 10 clients. Best practices, you go to those 10 clients and you say, by the way, there was a hack in Canada. It hasn't really got anything to do with this, but we recommend that you change your passwords, etc. If one of those 10 clients says, well, that's unacceptable, I'm going to sue you, is that then covered inside in terms of what the question is, Arlene?
So I think there are different things. So if it's your data that's being your company that has the breach. So how it typically works with a practical example is, so the good thing about having cyber in place is, first of all, a team will come in and assess which of your client's data was actually accessed. So the mistake we've seen made in the past, so there's a very public example with Discam where a couple of years back, and they just emailed their entire database. But what is more beneficial is for the team to actually assess, and there are different steps to take for different actions also. Was the data only viewed? Was it downloaded? So in a recent example, we had a client data, their system was breached, but only 10 clients' data was viewed and only 1 client's data was actually downloaded. So the typical actions to take, and the cyber experts team will do this, is for the data that was downloaded, they will actually do dark web monitoring on the data. But then for that client, and again, they will advise what to tell which client. For that client, you can let know your data was downloaded, but these are the steps we're taking. There's dark web monitoring. The moment it's mentioned or sold, our team is on it, and we will intercept that data before it happens. And for the other 10, you say your data was only viewed, it wasn't downloaded. And then for the rest of your clients, their data might not even have been viewed. So that is if your system is breached. The other example is if you get a notification that your password somewhere else was breached. So then you have to, so the right action to take in your company is to immediately reset passwords, because typically people reuse passwords. You shouldn't do this, but the good, but remember that is an external site. So it's not your company that has been breached, but just a good risk mitigation measure would be reset passwords if your email and password was breached anywhere else, just to make sure that if some of your employees use the same password, then at least that is no, that they won't be able to use that. That's
and I think that goes nicely to the example you gave earlier about a lot of the breaches that you're seeing is using people, targeting your employees and then hacking their systems and gaining access into your greater system through their system. So I think that's a great explanation. Thank you very much. Cool. Well, we've got about 7 minutes. Thanks so much, Alan and Trevor, for those questions. They were great. Have we got any others? I think Tanya, we also answered the question around 365. Helen, I think that in terms of note-taking tools, I think we sort of kind of did answer it. I think that in terms of the note-taking tools, Sirdar is a meeting secretary. So we take do lots of board meetings on behalf of clients. And so what we have done is that we've specifically mitigated that, and we've looked at the system that we use and making sure where it's stored. And that we got the right protocol in terms of where the source data is then stored, and if it should be destroyed, how it should be destroyed, how it should be deleted, etc. So I think that those risks are again, it comes down to you can't get away from them, but you can manage them. And you can also then, as Arlene said, you can actually insure against them and say, well, these are the reasonable steps that we took. to deal with that information and to deal with any potential breach. Sorry, I'm just running back up. Jenny, I did cut off the screen. I'm reticent to use two screens because I just don't think that I'm that tech savvy, and so I tend to move stuff around while I'm talking, and I think I might have just done that. So apologies for that. If anybody would like, we're going to share the presentation and also this recording. I mean, I absolutely, like, everybody, time is at a premium to everybody. So I absolutely love when you can kind of do 2 or 3 things at the same time. So today I managed to do a bit of a presentation and a bit of a punt for Sirdar and Dire Wolf, who we love using. But Arlene's also, given me some really great insights into thinking about insurance, and also just thinking about how to advise clients on the best way to do it. And I think that Arlene, thank you so much. But that idea of often there's this panic reaction of going, oh no, we've been hacked. Well, what does it mean? And getting the digital team in and saying, okay, but what does hacked mean? What did they access? Where is it? That was a wonderful little insight just into process and into risk mitigation to an extent. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I've popped up the contacts for both businesses. Again, if after this whole webinar you're not thinking of contacting the Dire Wolf team around just asking a few questions in terms of your own cover, then I would hazard that that's a great takeaway for today, because you can never be too careful. And then thank you to the Dire Wolf team, and thank you to the Sirdar team that are on, and to everybody that's joined. And I hope that this has been an insightful use of your hour. Please feel free to contact the contacts in there. Feel free to contact either business with any questions around this issue. And yeah, it's exciting times. I think that we're all becoming more productive. We're becoming, certainly on the face of it, smarter, and just make sure that we're also mitigating. One of the bits of smartness is mitigating against the risks of all of the new tech.
Thanks, Warwick. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.